This session is about walking through a case, an actual woodlot with an actual landowner, and the booklet that we handed out has all the information we'll be covering. But first, we wanted Adrian Prado, who's worked for us in collaboration, to introduce a tool that he built for the institute, but it's now available for the public, and it kind of synthesizes the what we know today about climate change tendencies for a bunch of indicators. So that's what he'll present, and he's in Edmundston.
Okay, great. So yeah, thank you, Gaetan. And feel free to interrupt me if ever the connection gets shoddy. So as Gaetan mentioned, I'll be presenting a tool that we developed in collaboration with the NHRI. So just to give you a little bit of background, I work occasionally with NHRI as well as with the Northwest Regional Service Commission on climate change matters. So one of the issues that we've encountered working with municipalities is actually that a lot of them weren't sure what climate change data actually meant for them. And so that's kind of the approach that we also took with NHRI, is to try to make it so that climate change data interpretation is a little bit more user friendly. So we started with available data. The province, we're pretty lucky in New Brunswick that the province commissioned Uranos, which is a climate change consortium based in Quebec, to develop some projections for the province on 29 different metrics or 29 different indicators under two different climate scenarios, which are the business as usual scenario, which is referred to as RCP 8.5, as well as a kind of moderate emission scenario, which is RCP 4.5. These data were made available to the public and to different stakeholders through these maps on a website. Uh, and while the data is useful, we thought that it might be interesting to further synthesize this data and make it more applicable to different geographical levels. So whether it be to the scale of a municipality, or in case of woodlot owners, to the scale of eco districts. So we also have been working with Dr. Book, who I believe presented earlier, and he developed his own projections for a number of different metrics, and the ones that we use in the tool are for soil water content as well as wind speed. And so his data is very high resolution of 30 meters, which is really great in comparison to projections that we obtained from Uranos, which are at 10-kilometer resolution. But again, how do we make sense of these kinds of data? So we also used the existing knowledge from the province on ecoregions and eco-districts. And so we took those shapefiles as well as open source GIS software. So everything that's being shown here as of now will have been done in open source software, which is important for to make it reproducible. So we used QGIS 3.8 as well as R and R Studio, which are open source statistical frameworks, as well as Leaflet and Plotly, which are some open source web interfaces to make the translation to a web browser, which is a lot more easily accessible by the public. So I'll go through the pipeline a little bit quickly, but essentially we went through the Uranos data and the book data, which were in a huge number of different raster files. So just looking at the numbers here, if you wanted to go through each one of them, you would be spending quite a bit of time trying to figure that out. And we kind of did spatial averages using these the zonal statistics plugin in QGIS to and collected the geometries of the different ecoregions to then and eco districts to then plot it. And so not only do we have maps, but you can look at them in plots and see how the trends are through time. So we came can move on to a demo. And so I'll just change this here. So the website that we are using is actually hosted by the Northwest Regional Service Commission. So if you want to access the tool, all you need to do is go to csrno.ca/climate, but climate as if you would spell it in French, so climat. You can also access it in English. And so there's a little disclaimer here about the sources of the information, the sources of financing, which in part was from the province through the Environmental Trust Fund, as well as our partners. And so this is actually a larger tool, which also has regions and municipalities here. But for now, we can take a look at the eco districts. So this is a tool specific to the eco districts. And we have both scenarios here side by side. So RCP 4.5 is the moderate emission scenario, which at the moment is the RCP 8.5, which is business as usual or high emission scenario. And so these are the different metrics that we decided to keep for the NHRI tool. For example, if you were interested in seeing how many days in the year have maximum temperatures above 25 degrees, you could see it in a chart form. So this is all still in beta, so some of it is a little bit slow and there's a little bit of technical issues. So please let me know if you do find any. These are the different eco districts in the province. So if we wanted to look at, for example, the Bluebell one, we can't really see it here with all, but if we double click on it, it'll isolate it. And we can see in 1990, there were 32 days where temperatures were above 25. And the current projections in the moderate emission scenario is that in 2080, we'll have 64 days. So that's quite a significant increase. It's about double. And you can see that for multiple different jurisdictions. If you decide to compare them, you can also click on multiple of them to see how they compare in terms of this indicator. And we have the same thing for high emissions. Another interesting element to this is looking at a different indicator here, such as freeze-free days. Well, we might want to look at a map and see how they're spatially distributed. So this tool actually takes a little bit longer to load. And so this is under the high emission scenario. I'll just let it load in. So we have the map of the province here. And what you can do is you can click on a specific eco district. Let's take this one for example. So this ecoregion, and currently there are, or in 1990, it was estimated that there were about 176 freeze-free days on average. And if we look at 2020, then we have here the change since 1990. So there was a 28-day increase, which represents 16%. And we can go up to 2080. And so we see how that will change. So this is a change of 83 degrees, which represents about a 50% increase, bringing it up to 260 days, freeze-free days. So this tool can really help orient decision-making and adaptation planning. We have a bunch of different metrics here, as well as soil water content, which was from Dr. Book and Winstead. I'll just go back to the presentation. So as Gaetan mentioned, it's all free, freely available, and it's actually, you can, if for some reason you decide that you'd like to host these data, you can also contact us. And so it's all packaged and easy to use HTML, just drag and drop it onto your website and you will have the website working. So what are the advantages of this approach? It's reproducible at the ecosite scale, which actually Since this tool was released, I have done the analysis at the ecosite scale, which has its own set of assumptions and limitations, but it might be something to look at. This approach is also simple and user-friendly for people to use. It has simple visualizations, and you can easily see the trends, especially in the plot layout of these different climate variables, and it can be used to inform adaptation measures. There are, however, many assumptions and limitations. So the polygons that are considered are quite large, and this can lead to some potential skewed data, particularly when you consider microclimates. If you're in a hilly area, at the top and bottom of the hill, you'll have differences in temperature and humidity and all sorts of elements. As well as spatial variation within the polygon. So at a higher latitude, so much more north, you might have differences from much more south within the same polygon. The original Uranos dataset didn't include US meteorological data when they created their rasters, which causes some edge effects. So in some of the eco districts, you might find, especially the ones along the US border, you might find that the values are a little bit skewed. And so that might be something to look at in a subsequent iteration of these data. To give you an idea, here's the distribution of the weather data that was used. And so we do see a gap in Maine, for example. This has been corrected since, but it hasn't yet been integrated into the tool. So when I initially did the analysis of Dr. Book's soil water content data set, I hadn't ignored the open water areas, which overestimated soil water content. The trends, however, still seem to be similar. So you can use it as a general kind of to guide you generally in terms of soil water content, but I will be releasing an updated version soon. These data were also modeled, so we need to keep in mind that these are projections and that they will need to be updated as new and better information becomes available. And finally, these data are mostly at the annual and seasonal timescales, and they present averages but don't specifically describe extreme weather events. So although we are expecting that overall the climate will be wetter, that doesn't take into consideration droughts or sporadic events such as windstorms that could occur. So that needs to be kept in mind as well. So I'd just like to finish off by thanking our partners, Natural Resources Canada, which funded some of the work that NHRI has been doing, the province of New Brunswick, which funded some of the work through ETF, our partners at UNB, and the Northwest Regional Service Commission. And I'll take any questions.
Merci, Adrian. Any questions for Adrian, if we can have a good connection? I think there was a question when Charles was presenting on how to obtain this data. So most of that is found here on this tool, other than the actual vegetative community specific predictions. And it might be a place where eventually we may want to incorporate some of that into that very simple tool. So. Questions, comments? Adrian, a last word?
I'm sorry I couldn't be there, but I'm happy that you got to see it anyways, and have a great workshop.
Thank you. It's been videotaped, so we'll be happy to make you hear how funny you sounded in some parts of the presentation with the poor bandwidth. Okay, so for the last part of our contribution here, we're going to run through an example of an actual woodlot in Madawaska County, and the information is in your book, your participant book. There's some blank pages that we left there on purpose, so you wouldn't just cheat and read the answers. We want to interact with you here a little bit. But the purpose is really to live through what we had presented today. So how do we go from high level all the way down to the tactical And tactical for us means you get a current woodlot, you got a current block, you're walking there today and you have to decide, what do I do for silviculture, understanding that the climate is going to change and the environmental conditions associated with that will be changing as well. If anybody did not get a booklet, we'll get a few spare ones here. Just raise your hand and we'll try to get one available to you. The screen is coming. Okay, so remember the conceptual framework that we introduced earlier that came from several organizations in the U.S. and we think they're pretty good as they are. And there's the reference here if you want to access the material. We can also make it available to the Federation to put on their website. So we'll make sure everybody has a fair chance to access this content. But the process calls from going from a conceptual scale, talking about options and then strategies and eventually approaches and finally really tactics. Like I mentioned, these are the actual concrete things you can do in the woods today. The first step is to define the area of interest, the management goals, objectives, and the time frames. That's very important. So in the general approach that we are happy with, we say don't start with climate change first. Start with your management objectives, your values, the purposes why you're managing this woodlot or you own land. Start with that, and then the climate information will come down the road. So this particular landowner in Madawaska County is into his 60s. He manages his lands sustainably. He's got several woodlots. His goal is to obtain reasonable rates of return, and he says by selling wood. He wants to support the local economy, the local infrastructures. He wants to support the auxiliary sector, trucking and whatnot. And even though he's into his 60s, which by no means old age, he still wants to invest. And when we talk to him, he says, my goal when I leave is to have those woodlots well managed and available for future generations. He believes in intensive forest management, so he believes in doing actions to improve the woodlots and not only accept what nature gives him. He's not considering negotiating easements, or he's not considering getting into the carbon markets and economy, and he wants to provide employment. And even though he's still young, he still is willing to take risks. So that's the landowner and his management objectives. So the site is in Madawaska County, behind Saint Jacques. It's a woodlot, but we're focusing today on this piece, which is about 9 hectares, so a small piece. And it is in the northern New Brunswick Highlands, in the Madawaska Eco District. Adrian just talked about that. And the eco-sites on that woodlot, there's 2 of them, but they're Eco-Site 8 and Eco-Site 7. Both are rich in nutrients, lots of calcium in nitrate form naturally from the bedrock. Eco-Site 8, which is the majority, is a dry eco-site, so upland here. And then Eco-Site 7 is slightly moister. Both sites are conducive to growing sugar maple and tolerant hardwoods, although there's a mixture of everything in there. Speaking of the mixture, Susanna and Patricia asked me to pick a mixed wood stand. There it is. We didn't want to slant towards a pure, nice quality, tolerant hardwood, so there's the pedigree of that stand. Basal area is low, about 17 square meters per hectare. Average diameter 23 centimeters, 600 stems per hectare, 9 hectares. 80 cubic meters per hectare merchantable volume, hardwoods, 21 softwoods. And here's the breakdown. We'll have a better graph in another slide. This is a breakdown by broad categories of diameters. This is small, 10 to 22 centimeters. This is 24 to 30 some centimeters. Mostly small stems, not a lot of basal area, a mixture of all kinds of stuff. And then the interesting thing, which there's not a lot of agencies or organizations or people that look at this in the detail we do, but we look at quality, and here you have the breakdown of AGs and UGs. Raise a hand here. Who knows AGs and UGs terminology? And okay, there's a few. There's room for us, potential for us to work with a few other people. AGs is acceptable growing stock. UGs is unacceptable growing stock. It's a measure of quality, and in our system, it's a mixture of tree form, health, vigor, and there's ways to determine, to boil it down to AGs and UGs. But in this case, small trees, average 23 centimeters. The proportion of good quality to bad quality is a problem. So about 3/4 of the stems of all species are of poor quality, even though they are small in size and we can guess young. Then we generate other information for that stand in that woodlot. So using LiDAR information, you get slope, you get aspect, you get the contour lines, you get the biomass growth index, and depth to water table. These latter two indicators or variables are great indicators of site productivity, site potential. Biomass growth index was developed by Chris Henniger, and it expresses site potential in terms of kilograms per hectare per year of biomass that you can grow. And this site here is at the high end. It's in, I think, 4,000 kilograms per hectare or more. You might see the legend better than I do here. So good quality site, mostly because of the calcareous bedrock. And then depth to water table, another indicator where if your depth to water table is too short, too small, then you have a problem with stagnant water. In this case, not the case. So overall, you can use these two pieces of information to infer site potential. We're not going to talk about this one because Chris Henniger in the next talk will talk about that. But these are predictions of species occurrence, if you want, ecological affinities where you have a potential to find a species or to grow a species. I'll let Chris explain that. That's a topic of his presentation, but very, very important tool into what we're talking about today, adaptive silviculture in the context of a changing climate. Okay, back to the species composition. So what does that mean? So the next step is to say, well, we described the site, we understand the landowner's objectives and values, we looked at some variables, so now do we adjust? So trembling aspen, 20% of the inventory. The trajectory for aspen, as per many experts, is going to be going down. I put green color because aspen going down may not be bad from a certain perspective. White birch forecasted to go down as well, which may not be bad. Balsam fir forecasted to go down in proportion in the future, same thing. Red maple, one of the clear winners of the changing climate, forecasted to go up. I put it red because it'd be nice to have something other than red maple to populate the site in the future. Sugar maple, unfortunately, forecasted to go down. American beech forecasted to go up in proportion. And I talked about that before. Birch, pretty well neutral. So from the inventory, we start to see what are the potential issues we need to consider when we formulate a silviculture plan for this woodlot in the context of a climate that changes. Adrian explained where we can extract the climate variables. So this is where we got those. We got a number of freeze-thaw days, so forecasted to go down for the Madawaska Eco District, which is good. Cycles of freeze and thaw in the winter cause great damage, especially sugar maple. Average winter temperature in the winter forecasted to go up, so an improvement. Annual precipitation going up into the future. Annual temperature, again, annual average temperature. It could be the coldest winter on record paired with the warmest summer on record. You could have different types of scenarios there. So, but average on average, temperatures are going to be rising in Madawaska County. Soil moisture content goes up, and then growing degree days go up. Again, we're specific to our woodlot at this point. Okay, taking this further. So for sugar maple, an increase in temperature as forecasted on an EcoSite 4, it makes it warmer. So for sugar maple, it's an improvement. EcoSite 8, which is dry already, if it gets warmer, it could be a problem. So that's why the arrow is yellow. EcoSite 5, which is moist and average nutrient regime. If the temperature increases, it might be beneficial for species like sugar maple. EcoSite 7, it might shift it somewhat. Now, increased precipitation. How does that modify our edotopic grid? So while just temperature alone here for EcoSite 8, which is already dry, might not be the greatest, if we have more rain, it might improve it. 5 and 7, we're not sure what it might do. So here's an example on how you can use some of that information and tie it to your actual woodlot. So the next step is to evaluate understanding how the climate is projected to change. Does that come and contradict the original landowner objectives and values? And in this case, what we concluded with the landowner is that because of the poor quality of the stand and the trajectory status quo is going to worsen, he wants to start over a new stand, and he wants to increase the proportions of sugar maple and yellow birch, and by default reduce the other species. So we can still manage the forest sustainably, obtain reasonable returns, invest, practice intensive forest management. So we tweaked his objective now that we say the actual objective here on this woodlot in Madawaska County, the objective is to grow. Start over, so start that stand on a new trajectory, and let's try to grow more yellow birch and sugar maple. Stephanie showed this relationship earlier, and we're adding on to it. So our research really demonstrates very clearly where you do have beech, which we do on that woodlot. This is the degree of opening that you create from the harvest-based silviculture. If you don't open up a lot, you'll maintain beech. But if you do open up the canopy, you're going to reduce beech. Sugar maple has a funny trajectory here, but there seems to be a sweet spot here in terms of canopy opening. Yellow birch, very clear. The more you open for yellow birch, the more you will grow new yellow birch. So this is for saplings 10, 20 years after harvest. So let's revise the prescription for that treatment. So for this purpose, we run one of our keys in our SPS. The first question is beech present in any of the canopy layers? We had 8%, so answer yes. We go on this side, is beech greater than 10% in the overstory? It was 8%, so we answer no. Is beech dominant in the mid and low stories? Do we see a lot of beech saplings and beech seedlings? We don't see this information in the inventory, but in the field, we answered no. Then we ask, is poplar and intolerant hardwoods greater than 30%? Aspen and birch together, I think we're close to 40%. So the answer is yes. Do we have acceptable growing stock in the pole size trees? Remember the inventory graph, small trees, 80% of them were UGGs, unacceptable growing stock, poor form, poor health, poor quality, poor vigor. So we have to answer no. And the recommended treatment using our logic, there's a ton of other tools you can use, but in this case, the recommendation is start over and use an even age silviculture system. So we picked uniform shelterwood for that site. There's terminology issues around these parts of the world, but we really encourage when you talk about a shelterwood treatment, ideally it's part of an even age system. And if you do the seedling establishment cut of a shelterwood system today, in theory, within 20 years, you've come once or twice more and you've removed most of the stand and you have a brand new cohort of trees to start. That's the definition for uniform shelterwoods. So here on the timeline, here's what this regime looks like. So we're here today, the stand is like that, we do the seedling establishment cut, we come back within 20 years, we do the overstory removal, and then you're down to almost no inventory. Then you're growing a young stand, hopefully yellow birch and sugar maple. Then you have options to control your regeneration in the stand initiation stage. And then you keep growing, and then you can prescribe commercial thinnings. So you could get on this trajectory, and in the meanwhile, new cohorts of trees will get established, and you've changed that stand, which was less than ideal at first, where you can have a high quality, highly productive stand down the road. So that's the recommended treatment for that woodlot. Now let's see how we want to look at it, understanding what we know about the climate. We talked earlier with the team about big approaches and strategies. They're all there. My feeling is that they all tend to be motherhood type of statements. I will enhance diversity. I will protect movement corridors, or they are principles more than actions at the tactical scale. Still very important to understand those, but for a silviculturist in the woods in May trying to decide what to do here, not as useful as the pure silvicultural information. So the recommended treatment was a uniform shelterwood. We can spell out exactly how to do it, how to implement it, right down to instructions to machine operators, pecking orders, what to do, trail network, whatnot. Of particular interest for the purpose of this conference today, or this discussion today, is we go right down to talk about desired outcomes from this silviculture regime that we are starting in 2020 on that one woodlot in Madawaska County. So expected immediate outcomes when the machine leaves the block, what are we looking for? Midterm, 5-10 years, and then long term. What are desired expected outcomes? Hopefully you're starting to see where we're setting the stage for adaptive management. We make a hypothesis. We want year 1, year 10, year 20, these type of conditions. So these can become your foundation for your adaptive management framework. Now, besides Jeff Sode here, who truly believes that we have the absolute right prescription for that block. I was hoping Joey, our colleague, would raise his arm, but yeah, so we're proposing silviculture, and according to our logic, and so don't take that for cash. If you do, it's no big sin. If you take for gospel what we're preaching, but we don't expect you to. Actually, we'd be suspicious if everybody said, yeah, it's all right. So how do we do the continuous improvement, the adaptive management loop in that situation? So we propose this regime, uniform shelter wood. Now, we will review that site. So we've done the seedling establishment cut. We took down the stand to 8 square meters of basal area to introduce new seedlings and let them grow. Now we revisit when those seedlings are about 2 meters tall to decide, can we take the top off now to release those seedlings? 2 meters is kind of critical. If you wait too long, you risk breaking your established regen. So there's a revisit here, and then you can change course. If the answer is yes, sugar maple yellow birch is well established, the overstory is slowing down their growth, I can take the top off, you do overstory removal, and then there's a next checkpoint. 50, 60 years down the road, is my stand doing well? And you can readjust. And that's where you may say, aha, now I have this nice 50-year-old forest, sugar maple, yellow birch, competition is setting in, so I can prescribe commercial thinnings. The point is, I'm trying to demonstrate that adaptive management is all about revisiting, checking attainment to objectives, and then deciding if you change. Coming back to this critical point, after we did the seedling establishment cut, and then we're evaluating is the regeneration well established. What if we got surprises? What if we got red maple and we got birch and we got poplar and we got balsam fir? We didn't meet the objectives of our treatment. So then you can decide on the same stand, I'm going to let it grow and I'm going to consider doing something else. So there's checkpoints everywhere. When you choose a regime, there's lots and lots and lots of opportunities to come and fix your mistakes by prescribing new treatments. This shows just arbitrarily the number of times you can change your mind in the future, according to this example. And what happens by the time we're over here? Like, Charles is going to have a better model. Anthony Taylor will have solved the riddle about how does red maple evolve. We'll know if it's time to plant black walnut that comes from Northern Virginia. So we'll know a lot more, and we will have a ton of experience, and then we can readjust. Here's another wild idea here. So I talked about implementing one treatment religiously, like the NHRI recommends, and then revisiting. But what about you say, hey, I would like to test your hypothesis, but Gareth here has a really good idea. I'd like a side-by-side comparison. So you can do that on your woodlot. Test different things so you can learn, because the biggest task in adaptive management is learning and adjusting. So recap, back to this morning's discussion, I believe the key is silviculture and adaptive silviculture. By learning the best silviculture possible, embedding our silviculture into a framework of adaptive management, and if you do that, we will improve much faster, and hopefully we can document the mistakes that we make and not make them anymore. We need to, the kids in our forestry programs, we need to make sure they are the best silviculturists that we have ever produced. They have to be better than us. They have to they are the key to this adaptation to climate change. And practice adaptive management, plain do, check, act, and start now. Don't wait for the climate to be ready for black cherry and black walnut before you start to adapt your woodlot. We can start today. There's no-brainer concepts out there. We know fir, red spruce, we know birch, we know poplar. Unfortunately, we know sugar maple are not going to do too well. We can start tomorrow changing our woodlot and set the stage to learn. So that's, in a nutshell, what we had to talk about today. Hopefully, we showed that there is a way to move from the high-level conceptual stuff and make it real at the woodlot level right away. And the key to do that is relearn your silviculture, but more so, make sure you're the best adaptive manager in the world. So, any questions, comments, arguments? Yep, Hector.
Along the way, where you stress or point out where you put in tools of transition and so forth so that you can, but because you talk about transition as an approach, right? And where along the way there we can, see those kind of tools and those
Tools like silviculture tools, like planting and enhancing natural regeneration. Yeah, well, yeah, consider them right away. And that's what I mean when I say have a look again at your silviculture training, and we can do that. And I can be controversial sometimes, and I'll even say, gee, don't laugh at somebody who wants to take his or her beech forest that is a nightmare, and then establish Norway spruce plantation. Like, as long as you have a logic, and like there's merits to that demon idea, but you cannot outcompete beech unless you use glyphosate, which is, let's not even talk about it. Like Norway spruce, genetically improved material, short rotation, 35-year, you can decide to start over. In 35 years, we'll have gained a lot of knowledge. So anyways, it's an extreme example, but I use it as a way to anchor the logic, where as long as you have a hypothesis and a framework and you're convinced nothing else works better, go ahead. And all those tools we learn at forestry school. Anything else? I hope I don't start a debate about using liquids over trees. Yeah, there.
Is it possible to do those prescriptions under economics? You've got a standard 8% bulk.
Yeah.
That's all our start with. Have contracts come in, do multiple passes, do a commercial thing, it's probably a pre-commercial thing.
Yeah.
Understand. To me, that's the most barrier to doing a lot of this adaptation.
Yeah, and I think you and I have been around long enough that in the 80s and 90s, you had all the good ideas in the world, but you couldn't implement it because you had no markets for your low-grade material. We got lucky, we got spoiled in the 90s and 2000s, and there was a big market for low-grade product, which made you able to do those improvement prescriptions. Now we're getting into a window where we're not sure which way it is going to go. So that is a true constraint, and that's part of the mix. But a treatment like that, you will remove in 2 shots 100 cubic meters of merchantable volume over 2 entries. So even it out, 50 cubic meters per hectare a shot. If you can sell your products, it's not a bad removal. You can cut your losses. You can make a go at it. So some of those fancy prescriptions, and this one I agree is kind of radical. You're starting over, very extreme transition, but it doesn't mean you can't implement it as long as you have a market for the products that come out of there. And by all means, if you have one sugar maple veneer log, get it out and sell it at a high price. But yeah, availability of markets, supply and demand, they don't go away. They're real things. That stand, you could wait. You could wait 10 years. It's not going to get any uglier. Like it's pretty ugly. So there's mechanisms like that can help you weather the storm and hope there's going to be big uptake of low-grade material. But I'm getting away from my expertise. Any other questions? Or I expected all kinds of tomatoes to be thrown up here. And
So if you left that stand alone and didn't touch it, would it be an old likely stand? Or would it mature and would nature look after it, just thin it out and?
well, yeah, like let's face it, like nature will fix itself, just not the way we want to. We want it. 15,000 years ago, there was 2 kilometers of ice over Fredericton and nothing but rocks and more ice, and so nature will adjust. So if we let this stand alone, my prediction is it's going to end up being heavy to beech and red maple and stuff that we don't particularly like today. But yeah, so that is an option. You can say, I'm going to gamble, I'm going to risk, I'm going to wait. People talk about the carbon economy. My school of thinking is, yes, that is very, very important. Mitigating carbon and taking it out of the atmosphere is critical. Where I come from, I think the more cubic meters per hectare per year you grow, the better, the more carbon you do tie up. And a stand like that probably grows at 1.6, 1.8 cubic meters per hectare per year. A managed yellow birch stand can grow almost as good as a white spruce stand, so 6, 7, 8 cubic meters per hectare per year. So if you believe there's a direct correlation between cubic meters per hectare of gross measurable volume and carbon, there's an argument there. But your woodlot, your objectives, as long as you have a framework for your rationale and your decision making. But purely timber, value, high grade material, that stand is not going to get better for a long, long, long time. Yep.
Gaetan, you talked about the influence of markets and the fact that they change, obviously. What would you, recommend a woodlot owner practice in terms of what's being predicted right now? So the mass timber movement for new construction and the fact of reducing capturing more carbon with that approach, and the fact that cement and steel materials generate a lot of GHGs, where we want to reduce GHG emissions, and now there's this projected demand or turn in the construction industry where they want to go more towards mass wood production. How would a woodlot owner kind of take that prediction or projection and work at managing his woodlot?
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not there today. Like, we still have enough challenges with putting to market traditional wood products, but I'm very, very, very hopeful that we're going to turn that around and actually promote using more wood and cross-laminated timber buildings and high-rise buildings, and the bioeconomy has not been. We always look at it and say, gee, it's not feasible, but things change, and the rationale for feasible change, and so I'm saying just be a bit patient and try to do what we have today. But I'm very hopeful things will turn around that way. We.
I tend to think that to talk about adaptive, management, you need to have some early indicators that allows you to see, the cause of, the result that you cannot see now, but which is what will come out, so that you can readjust yourself and and do. What are those early indicators that we have today to to be able to change course that builds flexibility to the system?
Yeah, so those indicators should be tests to our hypotheses. I will now start to grow yellow birch and sugar maple on that stand, and at age 10, I can take the overstory off. I think these are the indicators we need to look at, and that's a very simplistic one. To get there, we need to better our prediction model. So maybe Chris Henniger will say, "Oh, I need to talk to you, Gaetan, here, but the scenario you talked about, there's no way you'll grow yellow birch there because our modeling shows differently." And Anthony might have insight. So the key is, and one of the elements of adaptive management is to involve stakeholders, and so that's part of it. So involve not only yourself and your cousin and your brother, but involve people from other areas of the sector, so we can have those discussions. And that's where somebody might say, Hector, you better watch out at age 5. If you don't have 10,000 yellow birch per hectare, your scenario didn't work. So I think that's what we need to look at. Somebody else had a hand up. Okay, I have taken, oh, yep.
So you had the options of even-aged, uneven-aged, and two-age systems. Just kind of curious at what in what part of your keys does it accommodate for two-age systems, in essence, for accommodating for a degree of permanent retention at whatever level?
Yeah.
And what are the pros and cons that you see towards permanent retention? Do you see it reducing capabilities in some ways? Do you see it as an improvement? Is it necessary? Is it not? Because if we are speaking of uniform shelterwood systems, or uniform shelterwood harvests in even age systems, there's no retention. Right?
Yeah. So I know our system very well, but we're not gonna take advantage of that today to do a sales job. But there are people snicker, say, yeah, right. But there's areas in the regimes, ours or Nova Scotia's or New England's, Bill Leak's, and where you specifically have niche to maintain irregular forest, even maintain continuous cover, and in the other where you start with a high opening through retention, maintain ecological functions like lifeboating and refugee and all those things. So there are lots of opportunities to redesign your own silviculture system, so you have that. It would be a very complex discussion if you wanted to go through examples, but maybe you want a second crack at your question? I don't feel I answered it right.
I guess I'm thinking of it in the context of Nova Scotia, where now on Crown land it's explicit that retention is held on even age systems where clear cut is the prescription, so it's not even aged, it's two age in nature. There's 10 to 30% retention. And the benefits that are being lauded is that there's a multitude of benefits to keeping retention.
Yep.
I'm just curious if you have these different degrees of resistance, resilience, or in all these different models. Do you still explicitly have even age systems over two age systems because you think there are negatives to retention? Or are there benefits to it, and in what ways do your keys direct it in that way? Yeah,
so I understand better now. So at least for us, our systems have evolved where even where we say it's an even age system, there's recommendations to look at retention. For example, this uniform shelterwood system, the last cut is an overstory removal. We say try to leave around 4 to 5 square meters per hectare of basal area of mature trees. There's a lot of seed tree cuts that we're promoting. So I think there's ways to adjust any silvicultural system that way. Thank you very much.